Hey guys, Dr. Justin Marcagiani here. Today we are going to be chatting with mold remediation expert Jim Tomlinson. Jim is out of Colorado, so excited to dive in on this topic. We're going to hit all things from remediation, mold testing, mold assessment, prevention. So we will dive in on this topic today. Jim, welcome to the podcast. How we doing?
Thanks, Dr. Justin. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the
Excellent.
invitation.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Jim's information is moldservices.com. Uh, and he's got an email and a contact number. We're going to put it right in the description of the video. So if you guys are listening and you want to get a hold of Jim for a physical assessment or a virtual assessment, there'll be options down below where you can reach out to him. So, Jim, first off, we were kind of chatting earlier here. Tell me, how did you get into the topic of mold remediation, and how are you different than the typical kind of everyday mold remediator out there?
Well, my family and I moved to Colorado in 2010, and in 2011, we were it happened. Our neighborhood was in the Waldo Canyon fires, which was one of the fires that they've had out in Colorado that caused massive devastation. We lost 362 homes in our own neighborhood. The house across the street burned to the ground. We were backed up to the front, what's called the front range. And I actually saw the fire come over there were earlier evacuations, but I actually was there at the house when the fire jumped the mountain range and it's invaded our community there. So anyway, I went down to retrieve a couple of items that were not replaceable. First thing you would want to do, of course, is remove any sentimental things like photos, family photos, and that sort of thing. So I grabbed the family photos and the hard drives and computers and the file cabinet or the safe that had the important documents in it. And those are the items you grab. And of course, you're on the way out. And so we did, and we escaped okay. We were evacuated for 10 days. When the National Guard allowed us to return, we didn't know if the house was going to be standing or not. But when I went down to the basement to grab the photos in the safe, I noticed a stench when I opened the closet door, and it turned out to be mold growing inside the closet from a hose bib leak that I was totally unaware of. So my wife had been battling Lyme and was diagnosed with Lyme, so she was extremely immunocompromised, and we knew that we couldn't have any other toxins in the house, but lo and behold, we were living in it, and so that's started my journey or our journey into the mold business. We partnered with a guy in Texas. My thoughts were, well, hey, if it happened to us, it could happen to others. I was concerned also about the levels of carcinogens. When you have a house fire, you have formaldehydes and carpets and all these materials burning that form long chain molecules and are extremely carcinogenic, similar to cigarette smoke. So I partnered with a guy named Dan Yates in Austin, Texas. Dan's a 35-year veteran in the industry, and I consider him to be my mentor. And Dan and I started a business called Smoke and Mold Services. We only kept that business for about 6 months because Dan was too busy in Austin to deal with issues in Colorado, and he gave me his blessings and continued to train me, and we are great friends now. But anyway, so that's how we got into the mold business, and it's been a really good journey. It started out with just me. I started doing inspections for another company for a couple of years, and then started Colorado Mold Services, which we branched out. We're also working in other states now, so we adopted the parent name, created a company called Mold Services, simply Mold
Okay.
Services.
All right,
Mhm.
very cool. So the average, the everyday person, right? They come in. There may be like there's two kind of scenarios, right? There's going to be an acute, some kind of a leak, right? Pipe
Mhm.
burst, a leak in the roof, something happened where there's a massive intrusion of water. That water is hitting wood, it's hitting drywall, it's hitting insulation, and it's potentially creating mold if we don't get after it and get it remediated. And then we have the chronic, maybe high humidity situation, poor air filtration, and then that kind of creates this microscopic breeding ground for long-term potential environmental issues due to that high humidity. And you mentioned
Mhm.
earlier, we talked that humidity over 50% chronically with maybe dust intrusion in the air, can that be enough to create mold without like an acute type of water infiltration, like a leak?
Absolutely. If the relative humidity is above 50% for more
Hmm.
than 48 hours, keep in mind dust is a food source for mold. So you could
Right.
have dust, and I've seen this where you don't see any black growth anywhere. There's no history of any moisture intrusion in the building. And yet, if you go into the crawl space, for example, where the relative humidity has been above 50% for months on end or what have you, but certainly more than 48 hours, you can see what appears to be a slight haze on the floor joist, for example. And if you pull a direct surface sample off of that and take an air sample, you may find that you have, and this happened in one of our own houses actually, the levels of aspergillus and penicillium were through the roof. They were greater than 74,000 spores per cubic meter, greater than the lab even reported.
Wow.
And then the direct surface sample was very heavy aspergillus with many mycelial. So you can definitely have mold growth without having a major water leak.
Now, we talked earlier about water intrusion from a leak or some kind of a, you know, hole in the roof, etc. Now, you talked about mold can start to form in 48 hours. Let's say I get to a leak, I see the water, I get someone in there to suck all the water up, we get some dehumidifiers and fan, we start that drying process inside of that first 12 to 24 hours. Am I pretty safe for any mold formation if I start that process? Is it more leaving it and letting it sit in that high moisture, high humidity environment for those days on and that starts to drive it?
Yeah, I would definitely recommend having the moisture removed. So if you had say a toilet leak and it overflowed
You
and
suck
got
it up,
carpet
right?
wet, pull that carpet back, put fans on it. If as long as you know it hasn't been 48 hours, but if it's been over 48 hours, I wouldn't disturb it. I would have a professional come in and take a look. Um, but uh, but if you can, I call it the 48-hour mark. If you can address the moisture and bring that relative humidity down under 50% within 48 hours, you don't even have to worry about microscopic mold growth. But if you have toxic mold symptoms, and possibly even a clinical mycotoxin test, a urine sample that shows that you do have mycotoxins in your urine, then it's a good idea to have your home checked out for professionally for mold and mycotoxins.
So we
Um,
want to bring that humidity down below
bring the
50. We
humidity
want to try to
down.
get the moisture off in that
Mhm.
2 days, even if it takes wood, hardwood, or drywall maybe 3 to 5 days longer to dry out. We at least still have that environment down where mold is not going to start to grow in that time frame.
Yeah, you can run dehumidifiers though and bring that level down very
Fast.
quickly. Yeah.
Now, I
Yeah.
see this quite a bit, like, where I'm at in the summer, or you see it also in basements. Basements typically run about 20% humidity
Mhm.
higher, just because if it's a concrete basement, it's going to just
Mhm.
pull some of that moisture in the soil around it. And I see basements running 20% higher humidity. You'll see in the summertime, AC being on in the house, humidity maybe in the mid 40s, but you'll see
Mhm.
60 in the basement. And so,
Yeah.
is it good advice to have some kind of a continuous dehumidification in a basement nonstop?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have two 50 pint per day dehumidifiers running in my crawl space at all times, and it's important to monitor that. You can use an outdoor weather monitor. Accurite makes one. You can
Mhm.
purchase it for under
That's what I have.
$75.
Yep.
Yep, and you put your transmitter. There's kind of a trade off because there's studies that show EMFs actually increase mycotoxin production,
Right.
but and EMFs have a bad rap. But it's for ease of use, you have to find where the lines cross. I think it's good to have a outdoor weather monitor that sends a signal from the transmitter to the receiver. Have the display sitting by your coffee pot somewhere where you can see it once a day. Monitor that relative humidity in those areas that are suspect. And that could be in your attic, even with ice or with snow accumulation on a roof and inadequate ventilation and/or inadequate insulation in an attic. I've seen sheets of ice grow, on the underside of the roof decking in an attic before. So it's important to monitor those extremities of your home, especially like basements, crawl spaces, attics, and to monitor the relative humidity so you know it's constantly under 50%. I like to see it around 40. Yeah.
And even in the summer where I'm at, I mean, I'll have my, AC, HVAC systems going on all three floors, and I'll
Mhm.
have the temperature down to about 70, but the relative humidity will still be in the mid to upper 50s, even hitting 60 if the humidity or the dew point's, 75 outside, let's say a relative humidity around 60, 70%. Let's say it's kind of
Mhm.
in that tropical type of environment. Even an AC running alone nonstop may have a hard time bringing that humidity down alone. That's why I have 50-pint dehumidifiers on each floor of my home. And when it's on
Yep.
these really hot times of the year, hot and humid, I will pull out, you know, 4 gallons times three. I'll pull out 12 gallons of moisture on top
Yeah.
of the AC running as well.
Right. There are Home Depot and Lowe's and Menards, some of these box stores, they'll sell GE. There are a number of manufacturers, but 50 pint per day dehumidifiers for around $300 delivered to your door. It's important to get one that's Energy Star rated to help out on your on that. I would also recommend purchasing a 2 or 3 year extended warranty,
Yep.
especially if they're going into a crawl space or an attic area. But more importantly is also to make sure you have a built-in condensation pump so that it will take that reservoir and dump it periodically. There's usually a 16 and a half foot quarter-inch drain line that can be run to a plumbing drain somewhere. You may have to extend it, but that way you don't have to. Once the bucket fills, it'll automatically dump. You don't have to go and physically dump that reservoir. So that's important to have. And then again, having that outdoor weather monitor that measures relative humidity is important, so that you'll know if that system fails. If your dehu fails, you'll know, hey, there's something going on. Relative humidity is pushing 50% now. I better go take a look.
Yeah, with mine, I'll have because there's some areas where there's just not a water supply. There's not a drain to dump it, like in my bedroom or in my first floor. In my basement, I have a drain, so I have it run
Hmm.
continuously. Plus, I have an HVAC, an April air dehumidifier hooked up to my HVAC. I have both, but then I got 1,000 square feet of storage where there's no
Hmm.
ventilation. So I leave it in the storage area to keep the humidity down. But upstairs,
Yeah.
I use the Medea Cube 50 pint, but they have a 4.5 gallon holding tank. So that's
Hmm.
pretty good. And so I'll
Yeah.
dump it just that month or two where it's really, really nasty, that July and August. And I'll go and I'll pull 4 gallons out and I'll look at it myself
Yeah.
and be like, all right, we're good. But yeah, it's crazy how much water you can pull during that time frame. And that's where
Yeah.
if you
There.
don't get it, you'll get that musty smell.
Right. And there were studies. I saw one, and I'm trying to recall, but I believe a quarter inch hole in your exterior wall can allow something like 25 gallons of moisture into that wall in a year's time.
Wow,
And
that makes
that's
sense.
tremendous. Yeah, don't quote
Wow.
me on that. I think it was 25. It could have been less, but just a massive amount of moisture can enter into a wall, and that's why in areas such as Minnesota, for example, where there are unfinished basements, they'll have the exterior, sheet cladding, and then the sheathing, and then a vapor barrier sometimes, and then insulation, and then another vapor barrier. But it'll oftentimes be clear, and you can actually see mold growing in the wall in that unfinished basement where they do have warm air from they keep it climatized, but it's not completely finished with drywall. So you can have moisture build up from condensation where the warm air hits the cold air and it condensates. But the important thing about homes is to make sure whenever possible is to match your HVAC system efficiency to the to the size of the house and that sort of thing. Other factors that your HVAC company should be able to determine. Many of those will come in and do some studies. And if you're having excess moisture buildup inside, now you mentioned April air. Is that a humidifier or a dehumidifier?
A dehumidifier.
Dehumidifier. Um, I've seen humidifiers, inline humidifiers, oftentimes where many times they've been disconnected. But even the humidifier companies recognize that 50% rule on humidity, because their settings won't even allow you to change the setting above usually 45%, but certainly
Yeah.
not above 50. So
I
they
have a
have that
humidifier as
safeguard.
well too, and the highest
Yeah,
they can go because I have an April air humidifier too, and the highest they can
yeah.
go is 30%. Because
But
where I'm at in the winter, it can sometimes be 15, 20%, so it can be a
yeah,
little bit dry. But
right.
I've just said I'm not gonna do it. I'll just tough it out because I'd rather not deal with any mold from that too.
Right. Now, one thing that we've seen a lot, especially with empty nesters, a couple of things. We had a customer in Atlanta, I believe it was, that it was a very large house, about 6 or 7 thousand square feet. It was just a husband and wife. All the kids were grown, and they had families of their own. So they made the decision that we're just going to leave the unit off down in the basement, and it was a finished basement, very nice home. We're just going to leave the HVAC off. It was separate
Oof.
units. Bad idea. You must keep some ventilation going and some dehumidification. And of course, that's what air conditioning does, is remove the moisture. And in Georgia, where the relative humidity is very high outdoors, especially in the summertime, it's real important. So they had there was they had no moisture event other than the high humidity in the basement, but there was microbial growth on just about every wall in the whole basement.
Was it
And
visual or just that
yeah, it was
film?
visual. It was visual. This had gone on for several years.
So how do
Um,
you clean that? When you come in out of the gate, are you gonna rely just on fogging, or are you gonna do a topical hydrogen peroxide? What's the best way to
yeah. Well,
non-toxically knock it down without creating these metabolites?
we recommend first of all find out what the levels are, see if there's any has been mycotoxin producing or mold present, and has it produced mycotoxins. You can have mycotoxin producing mold present without having the mycotoxin levels being extremely high. Um, I've never pulled a environmental mycotoxin test where the result came back with all zeros across the board. There's always going to be at least some level of every mycotoxin group present. But it comes down to what are those levels. So if you think of a bad onion, you want to peel back enough bad layers of the onion and remove enough of the toxins to where it's considered to be acceptable. And but you'll never get rid of them completely. Just like you'll never eventually never have a clean, usually not have a clean air sample. You'll have some kind of background mold present because it's ambient outdoors. When you open your doors and windows, it comes in on your pets and on our clothing when we ingress and egress the home. So, but going back to your question, once we have determined what the levels are, then we dial up the proper remediation. It may just be running air scrubbing if it's just isolated to one area, micro containing that one area to prevent cross contamination. Put it under negative air pressure with HEPA air scrubbers running, and then topically treat everything, and then fog the area. Maybe if there has been mycotoxin producing mold and you have a positive mycotoxin test result, if those levels are just barely in the present category, simply fogging the home with a plant-based botanical mold enzyme could potentially do the job. Now, one of the things that we've seen a lot is many of our customers have developed chemical sensitivities. So it is important to not use chemical-based products when you're remediating. You can really cause a bad reaction. We used to use a chemical-based product, and it was a little discerning because some customers were fine and others were having a reaction following treatment. So we did some research and found that what was happening was these chemical-based products weren't actually hydrolyzing the mold spores. They were actually deflating them, collapsing the mold spore, and leaving. If you can picture a balloon after your son's birthday party 2 weeks later, laying in a corner, it's just collapsed. It's no longer floating in the air. That's exactly what a collapsed mold spore would look like under an electron microscope. But it would collapse the mold spores and break up the stalks of the mold, similar to a dandelion. You have your stalk, you have your root system growing into the food source, the substrate, the drywall paper, the cellulose, or the dust, and then you have your fruited head that has all of the spores on it. It looks much like a field of dandelions if you look at it under a microscope. Well, once if you treat with a chemical-based product, it will break up those stalks and collapse the mold spores, which are tinier fragments that become more easily airborne and can cause more of an allergic response following the treatment rather than actually removing those spores and hyphae from the area.
And so is that like a corncrobium, like something like that, or a Decon 30? Are those the ones that you're
Well,
talking about that
yeah,
will
well, Decon 30 is a botanical product.
okay.
We don't
So that's a
we
little bit
don't.
cleaner.
Yeah, it's better, I
More
think.
olive leaf
Now,
based.
now there are some, a lot of different protocols. We follow the ones that we've had success with, but there are some good products out there. We use a clove-based botanical product that doesn't require wipe down. There's some other citrus-based products out there that I believe are probably just as good. But we
What's the
just use the
specific one
products
that you
from.
use?
Well, we use a product primarily called Mold Stain Tea Clear. It's a tea for toxin. That's one of the products that we use. We use encapsulants 24/7 encapsulant. So we use these products that they're not always available. You can't go to Home Depot and Lowe's and the big box stores and find a lot of these products. You can find concrobium and some of those other. There are just a whole list of different types of products to use. But it's important to just make sure that they're botanical, especially if you have anyone in your household that's chemically sensitive. You can
And then
have a
so
reaction.
mhm.
Hmm.
So out of the
Yeah.
gate, let's say you see this film, right? You're gonna test it. You're gonna run some kind of a test to identify the mold, and you're going to also look and see if the mold's making mycotoxins, which are the actual flatulence of the mold. That's
The
kind of a toxic
byproduct.
byproduct. How
Mhm.
often do you see mold without mycotoxins?
Well, percentage wise, I would say probably 25, 30% of the time. So
Okay.
that's another reason you wouldn't want to pay for fine particle cleaning on your home if you didn't need it. I mean, it's a very expensive process. It's very labor intensive, time consuming. And even if you were doing it yourself, you wouldn't want to spend that time if you didn't have to. So it's important to, yeah, it's worth the cost of doing some front end lab testing to see what those levels are, so you can dial up. And converse to that, you wouldn't want to go in and do. Let's say that you thought, well, I don't think my levels are very high, but I'm not going to test. I'm just going to treat my home based on that assumption. And then you treat your home, you're still sick, and you're thinking, well, okay, so you finally do the testing. It comes back, it was much worse than you thought because you can't see the mold and mycotoxins. So it's important to know on the front end what you're dealing with, so you can dial up the right amount of treatment for your home.
Okay. And so you're in this basement, right? You have this
Mhm.
film. Let's say it tests positive for mycotoxins, obviously the mold, because you can't have mycotoxins without mold, right? So mycotoxins are going to be there, mold's going to be there, correct? You're always going to see
Well,
mycotoxins with mold.
actually, we've come into a number of situations where maybe the home has already been remediated, but the
Oh,
previous remediation efforts did not remove the mycotoxins. They did a
mycotoxins.
great job, a wonderful job of containing the situation, taking down and demoing the water damaged building materials, doing HEPA vacuuming and cleaning up and treating all those areas afterwards. Maybe they may even have good, clean post remediation air samples, which I highly recommend checking your indoor air quality following remediation. But let's say all that looks great, but they didn't address it at the mycotoxin level. So
And that's because
you
they
still
didn't
have these.
fog. They didn't use some kind of a botanical
Well, yeah,
fogging agent.
yeah, or maybe the levels of mycotoxins were so high in the other areas of the home that they needed to fine particle clean those as well. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about knowing what those levels are, so you can dial up the right amount of treatment.
So when you say fine particle cleaning, is that the
Mhm.
botanical air fogging or dry fogging?
Well, we don't do a dry fogging. We actually use, it's almost dry. The particle sizes are so tiny
Yeah,
that they'll dry in the air on the way out of the fogger.
right.
But there are a number of different techniques out there. But the technique we use is actually called a wet fog. But but the particles are very, very tiny, and they push into nooks and crannies and extremities. So they'll coat those areas.
And that's where
Another
you're gonna fog the botanicals, that's where it sits,
Right.
and that's denaturing it, so not just collapsing the balloon, it's breaking the whole
Yes,
particulate down.
yes, yes, that's important. But if you have more than just a light elevation of the mycotoxins, it's going to be important to also remove the dust, because the dust is a food source for mold. Have you ever noticed on an old, especially a single pane glass window in an old farmhouse, where you boil
Mhm.
water, you take a hot shower, and you see the condensation, and over time you may start seeing some little black dots on that glass? Well, glass is not a food source for mold. So what you're seeing is the little mold colonies on each dust particle that's stuck to that wet glass. And once it reaches the margin of the food source, it stops growing. That's why it looks like a little black dot. And so dust is definitely a food source for mold. Mold and mycotoxins hang out on dust particles. That's how they actually transport to other areas, and then they'll reside there for a long period of time until the relative humidity is over 50%, 48 or more hours, or a moisture event occurs, and then that starts the colonization of that mold spore, starts multiplying, and you have another little mold colony, mold growth. So another thing to be aware of is you can have mold in your home. We've gone into brand new homes before and done an inspection where someone was hypersensitive and we found mold. It came in on the lumber from the lumber yard,
Oh, yeah.
where the relative humidity is above 50%, or maybe it's in a warehouse where it's 60, 70%, or it's rained and snowed on. And over time, you have mold growth. It's visible mold growth on the lumber. So it's important, if you do build a home, to include, mold savvy, a mold savvy builder, or maybe inspect it on a daily basis, or have someone that's aware. Hey, we don't want to cover up any mold. We want to treat it. If it's on the lumber, either don't use that piece, or use another piece, or maybe even fog the area before you put the drywall up, things of that nature.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. The fogging, I've seen
Mhm.
people come in there and do some topical hydrogen peroxide at a higher level, and then use a
Mhm.
wand, and you'll just kind of, as the lumber's all up there, you'll spray it. But you see it. You get some of these Tyvek sidings, or you get, you're still. It's going to be hard to climate control it while you're framing a house
It
up. So it's
is.
still going to have.
Yep.
So it sounds like it's probably best to. All right, you get everything kind of contained, and then on the inside, before you start putting drywall and insulation, that you really do a good job fogging, or topically hit some areas that look more suspect. Would you agree?
Yes. Yes.
Now, just to
Yes.
kind of dive a little bit deeper, let's just say, there's a little bit of topical mold on a glass window, like you said. What's something that outside of a dry fog, like we're talking about, what's something topical that's gentle that someone could do? Could they do some hydrogen peroxide? Could they do a higher percent apple cider vinegar or white vinegar that's a high
Yeah.
acetic acid? What could they do to help that?
Yeah. There are some products that you can use to maintain recurring mold growth. But I would be and there you can buy those over the counter. I would try to stay botanical wherever possible
More
and stay
botanical.
away from the yeah.
And if you did
So
like
there are a
a
whole host of
Decon
them.
30, that's okay. That's a cheaper
Yeah.
one, and it's
Yeah.
seemed more botanical. Is there
Right.
anything else you
Yes.
recommend that's more over the counter like that?
Yeah, there are some citrus-based products. You can use. There's just a whole host of them out there. But the main thing is to make sure that okay. So if you see visible mold growth, even on the glass, for example,
Mhm,
where you have condensation buildup, you need to try to figure out how do we stop the moisture. So rather than just maintaining it,
mhm.
actually try to find ways to eliminate it from occurring, because it's just a matter of time before you're going to have enough buildup where it's going to get on the wood surfaces or those other food sources for mold, and you'll start having bigger problems.
So the
But
key for that is gonna be getting a good dehumidifier and keeping it under 50%.
yes, yes, you want to keep the relative humidity under 50%. You may want to, it may be something as simple as redirecting the airflow from your HVAC registers to blow up towards the glass, towards the windows. Oftentimes, when the home's being built, they'll strategically place those, if you'll notice, close to doors and windows, the registers. So, and if it's in the ceiling, you may be able to get a deflector to deflect that window to try to stimulate more airflow around those areas that are getting moist. But now another thing I started just touching on this topic is bathrooms. If you have, we
Mhm.
talked about empty nesters, but if you have teenagers, for example, and you have several teenagers and they take baths and showers at different times, and they take these long hot showers, and the bathroom's closed, but the first thing they did before they got in the shower is pull all the drawers open all the cabinet doors. Now you have all these cavities that are
Pockets.
open to
Yeah.
this moisture. Okay, so they jump in the shower, they take their shower, they may or may not have turned the bath vent fan on, but you've created this high humidity, 80%, 90% relative humidity inside the bathroom. It's a little ecosystem. And then they get out, dry off, brush their teeth, and then they close all these drawers. And then the next one comes in. So I've actually seen it where you can have the only area in the house that has a mold problem is in that bathroom, where those pockets of moisture have been closed up over and over. And I've seen it where you can actually have that fine layer of mold growth on the bottom of the cabinet drawer. So it's important to implement strategies in your household to prevent that. They make a retrofitted wall switch or electrical switch for your bath vent fan that you can set the relative humidity on, set it to 35%. And even if they don't turn it on, it will automatically cut on. They're 35 or $40. You can buy them at Lowe's or Home Depot. It will automatically cut on that vent fan to extract that moisture.
Oh, so the
Another
fan will go on automatically
Yes,
as
yes,
the
even if they
percent of
don't turn it
air
on.
goes up. Yeah, that's good.
Yes.
That's good.
Yeah. So things like that you can implement just to instruct your teenagers. Be sure and close the doors before you turn on the hot water. Just make them aware, educate. Everyone in the family needs to be educated on how can we prevent mold growth in our home, and try to catch it on the front end, be proactive about
Yeah, I mean, for me, I have a right now. I don't have to worry about it just because we're at
it.
20% humidity right now. So even after a shower, I barely get it to 45. But during those months, I keep my dehumidifier on and I have it set at 45%. So once it hits 45% or higher, it turns on automatically. So I
That's
think
good.
that's super important. I think yeah, it's a big deal because that's a big area. You'll see it, and that's really good. So we have a couple of scenarios. We're getting the humidity
Mhm.
down. That's one equation because mold needs moisture, it
Yes.
needs carbohydrate. Now, carbohydrate in a chronic situation could be dust, like you're talking about.
Right.
In an acute situation, it could be wood, drywall, insulation from a leak. And then it needs air. Air is going to be mostly a given unless it's a kind of controlled environment, closed off environment. But talked about topically removing it. You mentioned
Mhm.
some of the topical botanicals. We talked about hydrogen peroxide. Any thoughts on hydrogen peroxide as a topical?
We don't use the hydrogen peroxide. We use a product called chlorine dioxide, which does
Okay.
off gas. Chlorine dioxide is on the EPA N list for COVID disinfection. It also kills bacteria, viruses, staph, E. coli, Ebola, HIV. It's a wide spectrum disinfectant. It's fairly inexpensive, but it does off gas, so it's normally not. I'd be uh, recommending professional use only because of the off gassing. When it off gas, it is off gases. It is poisonous, but the off gassing is the secret sauce. The off gas is very, very tiny. It's smaller than the COVID virus, so it encapsulates and it gets into these little cracks and nooks and crannies. But that's the primary disinfectant that we normally use in what we call level one remediation. We use wire brush scrubbing. It's important to remove water damaged building materials. Um, if you have if you have drywall that's wet, insulation that's wet, it's important to the process would be to contain the area, put it under negative air pressure with HEPA air scrubbing. And it's also important to exhaust that HEPA filtered air out of the home because the mold spores, aspergillus, and penicillium are at 0.3 micron range. HEPA filtration will filter that, but the mycotoxins can get by. They can get through there. So you don't want to just exhaust it back through the containment wall into the rest of the house, because if it is producing mycotoxins, you can elevate that quickly. But then once it's been cleaned, or once the water damaged building materials have been removed, it's important to clean the studs and bottom plate, the 2x4, the framing behind there, and also to HEPA vacuum that. We will use wire brushing to get into. We talked about the dandelion with the root system. The roots will grow into the wood, into the substrate, the studs and 2x4
Right,
material.
right.
It's important to get in there. You don't want to just go to the margin. That's another thing. You don't want to, if you see visible mold, you don't go to where you don't see it and stop and just cut that out. You have to go beyond the margin. Some protocols call for 2 feet, as much as 2 feet beyond that.
Right.
We determine that based on a number of factors, but you definitely want to go beyond the margin of visible growth. And
I've heard
then,
too that if you have any
mhm.
staining on the wood, like any mold staining on the wood, that once you clean that up topically and or vacuumed it, to put some kind of a low VOC
Encapsulant.
lacquer over it to encapsulate it. Is that true?
Encapsulate, absolutely. Yes, and we use a product that renders the wood no longer a food source for mold. It
Hmm.
seals in, and if there are any other spores deep inside that wood that weren't extracted with the wire brushing, then it would seal those in. And then it also is it's breathable, one directional, so it'll allow the moisture, any resident moisture, to escape, but it won't allow moisture back into those 2x4s. So once all of that's done, the final stage would be to do the level two fine particle cleaning inside of the containment area to remove any dust, as much of the dust as possible, and then decontaminate the air scrubber, let it run overnight, and then come back the next day and turn the scrubber off for a period of time, and then pull an air sample inside of containment and outside of containment many times to check, because your technicians are going in and out of the containment area. If it's a do-it-yourselfer, sometimes if people can't afford or don't want to do professional remediation, we'll help them any way we can. We normally recommend that only non-symptomatic people participate in this. there's too much risk involved in their PPE failing, their respirator having a leak or something, and them having a reaction. So we recommend that you use maybe a family member or friend to do. We call them guinea pigs, but but you don't want to have you don't want to put people in harm's way. And if they have that HLA gene defect and they have they're hypersensitive, why would they want to put themselves in harm's way? Possibly. So there are ways to create negative air pressure. For example, if you have a bathroom that has a window leading to the outside, you can put a box fan in and seal around it and create negative air pressure that way. You can even use your bath vent fan and to create enough air pressure where if the door's closed and you seal the bottom of it, you've got some of that negative air effect that's sucking the outside non-contaminated air in. Because you can have as many as 65 million mold spores on a 1-inch square area of visible growth. So when you start disturbing it, it's going to become airborne by the millions. And that's the purpose for having it contained properly, having it under negative air pressure with HEPA air scrubbers running. So you can do it yourself in some cases, and in other cases, I would say absolutely not. But if it's a very small area, it's possible.
And with negative air, the fan would be pointing outside, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. If
And
in
so,
this situation, yes, with a box fan, absolutely.
and then when you talk about doing negative air containment, you're putting up some kind of a zipper wall, correct? So it's
Yes,
it's airtight. You're gonna have clamps, from floor to ceiling, and then you're gonna have
right.
some kind of what, a 3 by 3 type of funnel that runs through a HEPA, and that
Well,
funnel will then go all the way
yeah.
outside or to the closest window.
Well, these air scrubbers will move anywhere from 500 to 1,000, sometimes more, depending on the size of the air scrubber. But most of the residential jobs are small, isolated. 500 to 1,000 cubic feet of air movement is sufficient to create that negative air pressure. So you have your intake that has a 3-stage filter HEPA filtration system, and then you have your exhaust. Well, the exhaust we use lay flat poly ducting, and then that tube runs to the outside, so that as you one of the laws of physics that are, as you remove a volume of air from a contained area, it's going to try to suck it in from somewhere else, or it's going to create a vacuum. And in that case, our technicians wouldn't be able to be inside of the containment area. So we have to sometimes purposefully leave, not completely seal the containment, but leave some so we can get some airflow from outside. So there are ways to test that. There's some sticks that burn, that you can use a smoke test, or you can use a tissue test to check that airflow. They also make some scientific equipment that'll check and see what that negative air pressure is.
Okay, very good. You talked about the moisture. We talked about two big scenarios, kind of acute water exposure, remediate that. You call someone, you suck that water up, you get the humidity
Mm.
down. We talked about more of the chronic scenario. Is there any other big scenario you see outside of kind of the acute or kind of subacute scenario that I mentioned? Is there anything else?
Well, we've had customers that, again, I think we touched on this, but um, corrugated cardboard, the brown stuff, is a perfect food source for mold. So you have to be careful what you introduce into your home. Another source for that would be the boxes coming from China, for example. You
Yep.
order something on Amazon, they ship it. It comes. We had a couple of boxes arrive just this week, and I've actually seen visible growth on corrugated
Wow.
cardboard
Makes
boxes
sense.
coming from, yeah, because they're sitting on the ocean in a container that's not climatized.
Yep.
Relative humidity is probably 100%, and they'll
Yep.
be there for months on end. And remember, it only takes 48 hours. So it's important that if you do receive a corrugated cardboard item, even furniture boxes, you may want to consider opening, or I recommend opening those outside. Maybe wipe those down with a botanical mold enzyme
Yep.
product, and then HEPA vacuum or what have you, and then bring that item inside rather than bringing the box in and then creating it inside the home.
Got it. So some kind of a HEPA vacuum. Is there a
Yes,
brand you like on the
it's a
HEPA
good.
vacuum?
It's good. There are a number of commercial brands. First of all, I'm not a big a proponent of carpet. I don't like
Right.
carpet. Carpet harbors mold, mycotoxins, endotoxins,
Oh,
bacteria,
totally.
and all sorts of things. So our home's very large, and the first thing we did with my wife Jill's immunocompromisation is we removed all the carpet and pad and tack strips before and put down LVT. The only area that we put carpet back on was the stairwells because of the grandkids and the safety factor.
Yep.
So we use some really high end carpet for that, and plan on changing it out every couple of years. Keeping it clean, making sure no moisture's on it, that sort of thing. But 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 uh, but yeah, keeping your home mold free going forward is very important. So if you have a mold problem, it's a good time to get very well educated on it, and also on how. So one of the things that we recommend is a simple rigid vac that's a shop vac that can be. It's important not to to only use HEPA rated vacuums. Okay,
Got it. Good
but
HEPA-rated vacuum. Got
equally
it.
as important. So you can purchase this rigid shop vac for under $300. You can buy the shop vac by the Home Depot sells. 5 horse is what I recommend. At least 5 horse. That's usually the less expensive one, and a little smaller footprint. And then you take the filter that comes with that, and you just toss it. It's no good. And then you purchase a HEPA rated filter and bag, and they come with a latex membrane that fits over the intake on the inside of the unit. You make sure that everything's good and tight. You have the new HEPA rated filter. Now you have a HEPA rated shop vac. It's very low cost. They make some, that cost 2 to 3 times more than that are HEPA rated. But for the average homeowner, this is going to be good and what you would use to keep your dust down in your home going forward. I recommend taking your house, whatever size it is, and split it up into maybe at least 4 different areas, and just incorporate HEPA cleaning in each of those areas, maybe one area each week, so that every month you've wound up cleaning your whole house, dedusting your whole house. So over time, you keep the dust out, and it's going to be real important to do
Now, what
that.
about a high quality air filter? What kind of HEPA air filters do you personally
Well,
recommend? Do you like
yeah,
a
you
VOC with it as well? Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I think any kind of filtration like that's going to improve your indoor air quality. I think on one of your podcasts, I heard you have several different brands.
Yes.
Austin Air is one of them,
Yeah,
and
Air Doctor is a pretty good one.
Air
I know there's some
Doctor's a
cheaper
good one.
ones.
I think all of those. I think you
Costco.
can just read the specs on it, and there's some that I saw one in Costco not too long ago
Yep, yep.
that looked like a nice
WinX.
one.
WinX.
Yeah, like a room air. But and there are also some inline systems you can put in your HVAC system that could do a good job. In our home, we have 4 HVAC units, and we have HEPA, real thick HEPA filters in each one of those. But changing your replaceable filters on a regular basis. I usually, that's one of the first things I'll ask a customer is, how often do you change your HVAC filters? And sometimes I'll get, well, we've never changed it, all the way down to a couple of times a month, and obviously the more often you change it, the better, but you can get to a point of diminishing returns. But so I usually say change your air filters at least once a month. Those little 1 inch pleated filters, use a MERV, at least a MERV 8, but better if you can 11 or 12. Sometimes you don't see the MERV rating. Some of these other brands, they'll have particulate ratings, but use the better the filter, the better, the higher the filtration. The other thing is to have your HVAC ductwork cleaned at least once every 2 years. I've had a customer just last week. Well, we've been in this house 17 years and we've never had it cleaned. That's not good, because it'll build up layer upon layer upon layer of dust in your HVAC
Now, how
ductwork.
should they clean it? Should they do it where it's pressurized, where they're closing everything
Well,
off?
well, that
What?
gets to be a little tricky, because some ductwork won't allow you to use the brush system. It'll tear it up, punch holes in it. So you have to rely on your duct cleaning service. But if you can find a duct cleaning service in your area that understands that they have to have the system on a HEPA, one end of it on a HEPA system, so there's minimal chance of those particles getting into the open air of the room. It's going to be sucked back into the system. I like the systems that have that unit outside. Um, that way, there's no chance of it leaking in the house. And then this is another thing, Dr. Justin. Um, with vacuums, you also have to make sure that they're cleaned properly, because if you don't clean them properly, then they're going to leak. So even if you have a HEPA rated vacuum and it's in your home and you're using it, If it's leaking, you're just redistributing all of that. Another thing is if you have a house cleaning service, a housekeeper that comes in your room or to your home once a week or once a month, make sure that they use only your equipment. Don't let them bring mops and vacuums that could have been used in a moldy environment, and now they're reintroducing that mold into your home, which is not helping you at all. So we have housekeepers that come periodically, and we make sure they use only our HEPA-rated vacuums, our mops, and our materials. And the VOC situation for chemically sensitive, you don't want them to spray caustic products into your home. So you want to make sure you kind of monitor and manage that so that
That's
they're
good. I've been
not
a
using.
big fan.
Yeah.
That's good. I've been a fan of
Mhm.
the German, the brand Miele. They have a really nice
Mhm.
vacuum, some pet vacuums with some really good HEPA
We
filtration.
use the Milays for areas where the customer will not replace the carpet and the carpet's never been wet and moldy. So they want to keep the carpet for whatever reason, maybe the warmth factor or to keep the
Yeah.
sound down, that sort of thing. So we use Miele, and the thing that I like about Miele is the upright that we use is they're in yeah, I would say $800 $900 range, $1,000 range, but they have
Lasts forever though. I have one that's over
yeah
10 years
yeah
old, no problems.
yeah,
Worth
we
it.
like the Mealy. They have two motors, and they have high CFM rating, so
Mm,
they really do work well. And but there again, it's important to another thing with changing bags out. I recommend changing the bag out around the no later than half full, because as it starts getting fuller than half, it's going to start losing efficiency, and you've got more of a chance of it releasing some of that
leakage.
dust and particulate stuff. Right. So, and with the Mealy, there are a number of filters on there. It's important to change all of them on a regular basis. You have one down around the beater bar. You've got your main bag, and then there's another filter in there, depending on the brand. Um, but it is important to use HEPA-rated vacuums, and to not let housekeepers bring in vacuums that have been used somewhere else. And that's another thing. Um, you can have a customer. We have a number of customers that have moved into a brand new home, and they say, well, how can we have mold? It's a new home. Well, we talked about it coming in on the lumber, but other ways it can come in is if their previous home
Mm,
was moldy, they could be bringing mold and mycotoxins in on their belongings into the new home, and now they've cross contaminated the new home. Another situation is, let's say that their previous home was cleaned up. I've had this happen. All of their furniture, everything was fine particle cleaned. They're moving it into a new home that's been tested. Everything's great. But guess what? They move it in on a moving truck that just moved some moldy items on it. So now it's all contaminated, and they're bringing it in from the source was the moving van. So there's just so many
right.
things to
It
think
can't
of.
hurt. It can't hurt just at one when you get into that home, just
Mhm.
get everything, dry
Yes.
fogged. If you have the ability,
Yeah.
just go in there and you could probably dry fog a moving truck in just a minute or so. Wouldn't be a big deal, right? With a
Yeah.
good dry fogger.
Yeah,
Not that
and
hard.
that's exactly what we've done. We have actually treated the moving van now. The you As long as you're using a botanical product,
Mhm.
um, I don't see anything unethical with doing that. But the moving van company may not want you to fog their equipment, so
Yeah.
sometimes you have to do it. Kind of just take it on yourself to do it, knowing that you're using a safe product that's non-toxic, and that it's only going to help them. So.
Yeah. Or
Um,
you can also pre-treat the home ahead of time, and then right
yes,
after everything's brought in, do it again.
yes,
And then that way
yes.
you kinda set the tone for it.
We've had customers. I can think of one lady in particular. I worked with her for several years. Her husband was what we call a naysayer. Oftentimes, you'll have the HLA gene is only found in 25 to 28% of the population. So you can have a family of four members and only one of them be mold sick. The
Yep.
other three be perfectly fine. And if they don't have a mold savvy physician that's treating them, then that oftentimes the physician will say, it's all in your head. So now you've got the spouse and the kids thinking that if it's the female that's sick, that has that gene, um, mom's mom's just gone off the deep end, and it makes for a very bad day for the person that's feeling bad. And we see this often. So anyway, this one lady that comes to mind had stachybotrys in her master bathroom area
Yeah,
around the
black
garden
mold.
tub. Yeah, if they had carpet in the bathroom, that's a
Oh
no-no.
my
You
gosh.
don't want carpet in the bathrooms,
I
okay?
saw a patient with
So
carpet around their toilet. I was just like, "Oh my
yes,
god, thank God you don't have
yes.
boys." Oh my god.
I know. So and I that was one of my recommendations. But her husband was what we call a naysayer. He didn't think
Yep.
that mold was a problem. He was fine, uh, but this lady really was sick, and she had the clinical evidence to prove it. She had the clinical mycotoxin urine sampling. So anyway, so they wound up getting a divorce over that. They never called me to do any remediation. I don't know if they ever had that home remediated or not, but she calls me a few years later. She gives me an update. They had gotten a divorce. She bought a new condo from the divorce settlement. Not a new one, but she bought
Yep.
another place to
For her.
live.
Mhm.
She didn't have it tested, and lo and behold, it was worse than the house that she moved out of.
Wow.
So it's real important to test if you are moving from one house to another to make sure the house you move in, make sure you're not moving from the fire into the frying pan, so to speak.
I had
So
patients that did that recently, and they would
yeah.
bring the plates in, and they would just
Hmm.
bring it in, they'd put it down on the counter in a couple places, and they would
Hmm.
just walk the house for an hour, and then after, they close it up, send it to the lab, and then a couple patients came back, they're like, "Yeah, this house we were interested in, the mold's twice as high as ours. Nope,
Yeah.
not gonna happen."
Yeah.
It's good to have that, and you can always, make your option period contingent upon, a negative mold test too, if you're
Yeah.
savvy at that.
Yeah, and I'm actually a licensed real estate broker in Florida. My wife and I are. I was a
Oh,
broker in Georgia as well, and a real estate developer. We built homes from the ground up in a 48-acre subdivision. So I've got a heavy background in real estate and construction, and we do have some property management companies that send referrals, or they call us from time to time to check their homes out that are under management. But um, uh, what you want to do is it's kind of touchy because you don't want to cost a real estate transaction. So what I do is I recommend that both parties, buyer and seller, normally it's the buyer's agent that contacts us. Hey, we want to get this home checked out. Our buyer is highly susceptible to mold toxicity, and we want to make sure they want to check it out. So they'll have us do an inspection, and I usually recommend maintaining transparency between buyer and seller. We've oftentimes gone in and done remediation. Normally, it's the buyer that'll do it the seller that'll do it before they close on the transaction. And we can transition very well between buyer and seller. But anytime you put the trust on the line, maybe the buyer has some lab data and they don't want to share it, or the seller does, and they don't want to share it, then that's a good recipe for the transaction going south. So it's good to keep that transparency. Yeah.
no, that makes a lot of sense.
Hmm.
Also, designing homes, this is perfect. I didn't realize you had that background. Do you recommend, if you can, if you're building a home, getting waterproofing on the inside and the outside of the foundation? And then what about drainage around the foundation and sub pumps, etc.? What do you recommend just as a preventative to get your home more mold or waterproof, if you will?
Well, you can do perk testing, soil testing to find out what the soil is. I know, for example, in Georgia, you can dig 2 feet down and hit solid red clay. I mean, it's really tough. So you have some different soils in different geographic areas. You have different frost lines. You have different codes that you need to follow when you're building and that sort of thing. But across the board, it's important to keep the moisture away from the foundation, away from the home. In Colorado, you can have seasonal groundwater coming up from snow melt and that sort of thing. But it's just important to be mindful of that. There are a lot of products out there. There's a WR Grace asphalt impregnated product
Yep.
that you can use for flashing, and there are just a lot of different. I was talking to a guy in Wisconsin um, a few weeks ago, about a month ago, that was a builder. He builds 800 homes a year, residential homes, and he was telling me about a system that he used on his basement of his own home when he built it, and I was like, man, that's the best I've ever heard. He had layer upon layer upon layer of moisture intrusion prevention, and but you can using French drain systems.
Yep.
Most codes will have some kind of waterproofing, but it's good to research that if you're having a home built. Make sure that you're going above and beyond. and making sure that you keep that moisture out of there. Um,
That's great.
yeah.
Now, I also see people every now and then I've seen this where people have had moisture in the ductwork of their
Mhm.
ventilation. I'm not sure if it's because there was a temperature gradient, not enough insulation, or because the humidity was still really high, even though you had
Mhm.
AC running. You can see that in Florida. It's quite
Sure.
common to see 60% humidity with a 70% temperature and the HVAC running. How do you
Right.
prevent that? And is that an issue?
I,
Do you see that often?
Will, it's funny you say that because just a couple of months ago we had a situation where there was probably a gallon or two in the ductwork of the home, and it was a multi-million-dollar house. I think it was 5,000 square feet. They probably had two or three systems, but they were working with a general contractor that called and said, "Hey Jim, we were changing out some of this ductwork and there's moisture in it." So that's another reason for having your HVAC ductwork cleaned at least once every 2 years.
Get the dust out of it.
The other thing, in addition, we talked about having a HEPA filtration system on one end of it, HEPA vacuum. But another thing is to have them do before and after photos and videos. So they'll have a camera on the front end of that that brush or whatever system they're using, and they'll go in and they'll record and they'll check the junctions and the plenum and the ductwork, and they'll stop and record areas where they see microbial growth so that they can show you that it's being cleaned afterwards. If you were to encounter moisture in the ductwork, you would obviously see that. But if you suspect or have that situation, I would recommend checking with your HVAC contractor. They have technical equipment that they can monitor or measure that with, and they can see what those dew points, see what all that lines up, and find out if your system is adequate or not, and make necessary changes. There are ways they can dry the air. There are devices they can attach to the system that can actually dehumidify the air as it's going through the system and maybe prevent some of that moisture buildup.
And what about in the actual HVAC unit? Is it possible that there's leakage there and then you can get mold growth in the actual unit itself?
There could be, and that's why that should all be inspected and sealed if you do have any penetrations. There's
Yeah, I recommend it's good once or twice a year, especially if you're in a hot
Yeah,
climate, to get your HVAC at least fully looked at as a tune-up,
yes.
start of the season, mid-season kind of thing.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe a good time would be the start of the summer and the start of the
Yep.
winter,
Yep.
like in the spring and
Yep.
fall. Those are two good times to do it because you have two different systems working. You have air conditioning or heating. So it's really a good idea. And if you do have your ducts cleaned, it's also a good idea to have the coils cleaned as well. Those you can have
Yes.
mold buildup on the coils. So.
That's great. Very good. And who do you recommend to get ductwork? Is there certain companies, or would you recommend just calling your big HVAC installer that does a lot of that see what they recommend?
Well, do your due diligence. Check your area. Sometimes you can find really low price deals on Groupon and Living Social and things like that. But are they going to be effective? So you could ask the questions that we discussed earlier. Do you have a
HEPA
HEPA system
vacuum
on? Yeah. Do
outside
you
of the house.
do you take photos? Another thing is if you do have a brush system, go in clockwise and back out counterclockwise, and then do it again on each trunk so that you're getting a thorough clean. And then when you have your photo afterwards. So what I'm finding more and more is the really good duct cleaning services. They're not going to be in and out in an hour or so. They're going to take 6 hours, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours to clean your ductwork. It's going to take most of a day.
And that brush has a HEPA on it, so they're going in, they're sucking as
Yeah.
they're agitating.
Yeah. Ask those questions. And then another big question to ask Dr. Justin is, are you using any kind of antimicrobial agent after you clean the ductwork to treat it? And if they are, make sure it's botanical. You don't want to
Right.
use some products are oxidizers. They can cause wear and tear, excess wear and tear on your systems, um, your components, and then more importantly, they can also collapse the spores or break up the hyphae and create a more allergenic environment
I've
than
heard
the
ozone
fluorinated
does
mold.
that. Do you have thoughts on ozone?
Yeah, ozone. Well, I'll tell you this: the chlorine dioxide product that I was telling you about. Uh, for a short time in Colorado, we got into the because it breaks down long chain molecules. It actually breaks for post fire. odors and pet urine odors and that sort of thing. It also destroys those. You know, the odor elimination business is a multi-billion-dollar industry, but most odor removal works like this, like Febreze and some of these products. They work like this. They either encapsulate the offending bacteria, the odor, they encapsulate it with a shell, and you no longer smell it. But over time, it doesn't kill it, so it breaks through the shell. Then you smell it again. You run down to Walmart, buy some more. You come and hit it again. This stuff works great. We just need more of it. Or the second way that they usually work is to mask the offending odor with a better smelling, stronger odor that eventually wears off. And now you smell it again. You're running down to buy more.
Right.
So what products like chlorine dioxide do, and that's another reason we use that, is they actually break down the long chain molecules. And cigarette smoke has over 500 different chemicals in it, and they form these carcinogenic long chain molecules. It actually destroys that, breaks those down. Same thing with pet urine odor. So it doesn't mask it or encapsulate it, it actually annihilates it. So you no longer have it, kills the bacteria, you no longer have the odor. So that's another reason that we use that product and
That's great.
disinfection. Mhm.
Excellent, Jim. Well, I think you've answered all the questions here wonderfully. I'll just kind of put your contact info here one more time for everyone.
Sure.
Moldservices.com. Jim
Mhm.
Tomlinson. Jim's in Colorado. Sees people as
Well,
well virtually as
yeah.
well. Go ahead.
Right, that's right. I was going to say we have done work in, I think last count, 18 states. This
Oh,
past
wow.
month we were
That's
in
great.
Minnesota, San Diego,
Wow. So
Georgia.
you'll travel.
Uh,
So you'll travel?
oh yeah. From time to time we do. Where it makes sense.
Right.
Again, we try to do as much or as little as we can, or as the customer wants, to help them with the product as much as they'll let us. Sometimes finances are an issue. Sometimes, yeah, it's just a whole host. I had a couple down in Pueblo that they couldn't afford testing or anything. I mean, the whole family was on disability, and you just give them advice and tell them ways that they can maybe do some self remediation, recommending they use someone that is non-symptomatic, maybe a non-symptomatic family member, and follow that protocol. So again, we're in the business to help people. We had our own mold story, mold journey, and we know that it's important.
That's great. So Jim Tomlinson here, Mold Services with an S.com. We'll put Jim's contact number and email. Feel free and reach out if you need Jim's support. Jim, thanks so much for coming on
It's
the
a
show. Anything
pleasure.
else you want to leave the listeners with?
No, I think we're good. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, and God bless you guys.
Thanks so much, Jim. Thank you.
All right,
God
bye
bless.
bye, bye bye.